Hello, Olly here. Just a quick message before we start unwrapping the week, and that is to remind you of our alma mater, The Week magazine. It is the perfect news source during the coronavirus lockdown, delivered to your door each week. It includes all the best news stories, reviews and columns from more than 200 UK and international sources. And to get your first 12 issues for just 12 quid and a free Moleskine notebook, go to theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code POD12. That's theweek.co.uk/offer and the promo code POD and the number 12. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday the 2nd of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the worldwide death toll from coronavirus surpassing 200,000, Boris Johnson and Kari announcing the birth of their baby boy, and the death of Bollywood stars Irfan Khan and Rishi Kapoor. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Gabriel Power and Kari Wilkin, and the man now seemingly destined to be our Australia correspondent, Arion McNicoll. You're still down under, Arion?
I still am, and I've gone back to my real accent, mate. This is how I actually sound.
Well, fair dinkum. You're up first. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This week it became clear that sweet dreams aren't made of this.
I keep having this dream where there's a monster in the room and I can't really see it. And then right before it attacks me, I wake up covered in sweat.
I was in an elevator with my family and the doors open. It was my father, who died when I was 16. He just smiled and said, "I'm dead. I don't have to wear a mask."
So the other day I had a dream that I saw Dave Chang, the chef, and then I was asking him for his unfiltered, unadulterated feedback on my coronavirus recipes.
A clip from NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday. Okay, so, Arion, we've all been avoiding the news a bit, but you've come to me with a woolly feature item about dreams as your story of the week. Really?
Yep, really, because it's not actually as woolly as you might believe it is woolly. And that is because this week, following however many weeks of lockdown we've all been under, it's probably different in all different parts of the world, but people around the world have been reporting that they're experiencing really regular and intensely vivid dreams in a phenomenon that's been labelled quarantine dreaming. And to measure what's going on, a Harvard University professor called Deirdre Barrett has begun collating the reports that she's been seeing and now being sent. And she's got 6,000 dream samples so far from 2,400 people around the world. And what she's noted is this really striking and unusual similarity, not just in the vividness, as I mentioned earlier, but also the subject matter of the dreams. And the subject matter is covering a whole lot of different territory, like the stuff that we just heard in that clip at the top there. But it touches things like anxiety dreams, health and illness, or things that sort of stand in for illness, stuff like swarms of insects, worms, grasshoppers, and so on. And then dreams about losing control, people being held down or attacked or imprisoned. And so there's this sort of thematic similarity as well as the sort of the vividness of the dreams that's really interesting.
Okay, but Kari, this isn't a big surprise, is it? I mean, in moments of anxiety, people have anxiety dreams. Isn't this what you'd expect?
It is. It's clearly a pattern. I mean, this same psychologist, she actually collected dreams after 9/11 as well and found very similar patterns, particularly among frontline medics who are dreaming, as you might expect, about, trying and failing to take care of patients, overloaded wards, that sort of thing. It's clear signs of trauma, but I think we can still learn a lot from this, and it raises many interesting questions about how dreams work, what the point is of them, what our mind, if anything, is doing when we dream.
Okay, Gabriel, then, what is a dream and what is the point of a dream?
Well, I feel like that's a pretty big question that we've struggled to answer for many centuries, really, or millennia, probably. The hypotheses are widely varied on what exactly a dream is and what the purpose of them are. I mean, there are some people who believe that dreams don't even really exist and that it's your brain kind of trying to make sense of neuron firings during your sleep that happens the second that you wake up, which indicates that all of what you perceive to have happened in the last 8 hours that you've been asleep actually has only just kind of manifested itself in your brain at the point of waking. So I feel like we're so far off figuring out, if we're still kind of toying with those sorts of theories, that indicates we're so far off understanding how dreams work, how we could possibly record them, how we could, know what they mean or the ramifications of them, that it's going to be an uphill struggle to figure out exactly how quarantine is affecting them in the long run.
I actually looked back at the history of what humans have thought that dreams are about throughout the ages, and apparently the ancient Egyptians thought that dreams were pretty much just a different form of seeing, and they'd prize dreams and regard them as a foretelling of the future. Same with the ancient Greeks and Romans, although they also could sometimes imagine that they were visitations by the dead and the communication of people who were coming back from the dead. Skip a few millennia forward and you get to Sigmund Freud, who underpins our contemporary understanding of so much about the mind, even this much later. And he thought that dreams were an expression of repressed conflicts or desires, often sexual, because he was Freud. But then modern psychologists and neurologists who are armed with more significant equipment, things like PET scans and MRIs, have sort of dug deeper into what the brain is doing. And one of the contemporary ideas is that it's a sort of a dumping of excess data and a consolidating of important information, and through that kind of refining the things that you've experienced for the next day and the days ahead.
Yeah, well, Kari, my experience of dreams very often is that although the plot of what I've just imagined is completely nonsensical and seemingly irrelevant, that idea of there's something on my mind, so sleep on it, and in the morning you'll have a clearer understanding. It is like a kind of refrag, isn't it? It's like a Control-Alt-Delete. Your brain does something, you wake up and you see clearer about the things that do matter.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there is, as Arion was saying, there's this theory that it's essentially just the brain's way of dumping excess data, and there have been some really interesting studies about how that might work. But, that many experts believe that actually we can benefit from analysing dreams, that it's our minds consolidating important information, basically considering information that's being repressed during the day and operating at a more emotional level, so that we're making connections regarding feelings that the conscious self wouldn't make. And Barrett, actually, this Harvard psychologist, she views dreaming as simply thinking in a different biochemical state. So, we have these expressions about sleeping on it. And as you say, often you need to make an important decision. And clearly some part of your mind is still wearing away during the night, because you wake up with a much clearer sense of what you should do.
Could this be psychologically helpful to people, Arion, this increase in quarantine dreaming, if that really is a thing? For those reasons, people are rebooting, they're processing their thoughts, and that's a good thing rather than being sort of psychologically traumatic, having anxious thoughts.
I think so. I suppose it depends on what the actual subject of the dream is. And if they're nightmarish in quality, then I imagine that people wouldn't regard them as terribly helpful or beneficial, and particularly if they're the sorts of dreams that are going to actually interrupt your sleep. And that is another thing that people are reporting around the world, that actually their sleep is being disrupted. They're waking up early, or they're waking up in the middle of the night. So I think that stuff probably isn't terribly useful.
There is actually a theory that dreams are also about keeping us alert to danger. It's called threat simulation theory, which is the brain responding to potential future dangers by essentially running fire drills while you're sleeping. And one part of the brain areas that's been found to be most active when we dream is the amygdala, which is associated with the fight or flight response. So in that sense, you could say that during a pandemic, actually it's your brain telling you what to watch out for. I mean, probably most of us know what to watch out for, but it's making sure. And there have been many dreams about hands falling off or becoming inactive, or skin falling off hands. And obviously that's connected to this fear of touching, that you can hurt other people or yourself by touching. But, again, it's the brain, you could argue, reminding you.
I mean, one of the reasons that we know, Gabriel, that people are having this spike in anxiety dreams at the moment is because they're Googling it, right? They're saying, what does this dream mean? Why am I thinking like this? And it strikes me, it's quite interesting. It should be a really positive side effect of the lockdown, actually, that people are having more time to sleep. Because one of the things that happens is when you're sleep deprived, you don't dream as much. When people have time to sleep, now they're complaining about what they're thinking about. I mean, actually, all of this is really it's just a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance.
It is, and I also feel like it's something that, it is hard to read into at the moment. It's a brief window of time where everything is being kind of, uprooted. We've lost our normal routines. Everything is a bit odd. Job security and all that sort of stuff has kind of gone out the window. And so I feel like it's understandable, obviously, as we've already said, that people would be experiencing unusual dreams or particularly negative or pessimistic dreams. But I still I'm not convinced at all, not that I'm a neuroscientist, I'm not convinced at all that they actually mean anything or that they are reflective of much other than just elevated stress levels.
Kari, is there any way we can prevent ourselves having bad dreams?
Well, actually, I was looking into this and going back to what you said about not getting, being sleep deprived will stop you dreaming. Actually, that's not true. Being sleep deprived can make the parts of the brain that are related to dreams more active. So in fact, you'll have more vivid dreams and be more likely to recall them. Apparently, other things you can do to prevent bad dreams is not to get pregnant, which probably isn't a worry for you lot, but increased hormone production affects the way that your brain processes thoughts and emotions. Obviously tackle mental health disorders, although unfortunately many medications such as antidepressants are also associated with higher risk of nightmares. And food is a big thing. We've got this myth about eating cheese late at night gives you nightmares, and in fact that probably is rooted in the truth, in the sense that eating late at night makes you more likely to wake up during the lighter REM, rapid eye motion stage of sleep, when you're more likely to remember more of your dreams.
That's not a myth. That happens to me. I don't care what you say and what science you throw at me. I have cheese dreams.
It's rooted in truth.
Definitely true. Arion, is there a technological solution to this? I mean, presumably people are looking at a bit of biohacking here.
Well, I read about a team from MIT who in 2018 created a device called the Dormio that apparently allows people to control the content of their dreams. It's kind of like Inception mixed with a Nintendo Power Glove. It's this device that you strap to your hand, and it tracks your biosignals, your heart rate and your muscle tone and so on. And once a wearer is about to move into a deep state of sleep where you don't dream, a bedside robot or device is triggered to emit a noise, and that noise then researchers found, if it contains a word in it, that the word would have some impact on the dream. So if it said rabbit or astronaut or whatever, you'd start dreaming about rabbits in space. But short of those sort of university-based experiments, there are loads of products that can help people at least track their sleep and monitor their dreaming and log their dreaming. And those are, readily available apps that you can download. There's also various devices that you can strap to your head if you do want to change your dreams, but they sound pretty dodgy, and overwhelmingly, at least the ones that I found, have very poor reviews. So I wouldn't necessarily count on those.
Lo-fi tip, read a book. That's another way to influence what you're thinking of just before you shut your eyes. I don't want to linger too long on this because I know from experience, I've been podcasting for over 10 years and I have an unwritten rule never to ask anyone about the content of their dreams, because it always gets edited out because it's always tremendously boring, other people's dreams. But briefly, have any of you had a quarantine dream?
I've been having really boring dreams about editing copy that is full of mistakes about the coronavirus, because obviously it's so science and figure heavy. And then I publish it and I'm like, oh crap, it's wrong, which obviously you'd never get in real life on theweek.co.uk.
Gabe?
Well, if I were to, linger on it for slightly longer than you probably want, the reason I don't think that there's too much to be read into is the fact that recently there was a day in which I moved house and discovered all this really exciting stuff in my life. And then at one point during the day, I saw a hot air balloon out the corner of my eye, and my entire dream was about me being a hot air balloon pilot. So that indicates that big life move, decisions and events don't actually have that much of a bearing on dreams.
So you believe you could yet become a hot air balloon pilot? We will keep everyone posted just in case. Gabriel, you're up next after this. Okay, Gabriel, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Is Saudi Arabia on the way to terminating executions?
From the foundation of Saudi Arabia, the support of the religious establishment has been central to the royal family's grip on power. The regime uses traditional Islamic punishments. Executions are often carried out publicly with one sword blow to the neck. The headless bodies are sometimes then displayed publicly.
Taken from the Real Stories YouTube channel. That was part of a documentary called Saudi Arabia Uncovered. Gabriel, what's happened this week?
Saudi Arabia has announced that it will continue its push towards modernization by abolishing the death penalty for people who committed crimes as minors. So they're no longer beheading children or people who committed crimes as children. And obviously in a country where, simply attending an anti-government rally can get you executed, that's quite a reprieve for younger prisoners, even if it's left the rest of the world kind of shrugging a bit.
Okay, so a significant story, obviously, if you live in Saudi Arabia. But why is this significant for the rest of us? We knew that Saudi Arabia was modernizing anyway, or at least putting a big PR push behind their modernization efforts.
Well, to me, I think it's the fact that this move has not taken the form of other pushes towards modernization that they've had. So either they're doing something with this move that I and a number of other observers haven't quite understood, or they've not read the room properly. Because for a start, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so other countries aren't really paying attention to Saudi Arabia's modernization push, which, if their modernization push takes the form of previous moves that they've made in the past, like allowing women to drive and allowing people to, attend cinemas and things like that, it's clearly done in a way and timed in a way in which they expect the outside world to be like, oh, look, Saudi Arabia's, modernizing and doing good things. But in the middle of a pandemic, nobody's going to be doing that. And the other thing is that nobody's going to be lining up to pat Saudi Arabia on the back for not executing children, especially as their record of beheading children or people who committed crimes as children contravenes their obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which they signed.
But actually, Kari, couldn't this, in fact, be clever PR for those reasons? Like, if people have cynically believed that everything Saudi Arabia has done to modernise over the past 3 or 4 years has really been for its international reputation, wouldn't they in future be able to point to this example as something that they did when no one paid any attention, but they did anyway because it was the right thing to do, which in itself, at a later date, might be really good for their international reputation?
I think there's an element of that. I think it's also slightly misleading to say the rest of the world isn't paying attention. Only last week, Amnesty International released a report saying that Saudi Arabia released a record number of prisoners last year, a record high of 187. And Saudi Arabia has the world's highest rate of execution after China and Iran. And obviously that's getting a lot of attention. Again, last week, there was the death in prison of human rights activist called Abdullah al-Hamid, who had been sentenced to 11 years in 2013 on multiple charges, and he died after suffering a stroke, after apparently suffering ill health in a Riyadh prison, and campaigners say he'd basically been denied vital medical attention. So I think there's a real need right now for Saudi Arabia to be seen to be doing something good.
But I mean, Amnesty International are always going to say, unless you cut the death penalty completely, we're not going to exactly celebrate good news, as Gabriel was suggesting, that you're executing slightly fewer people. But Arion, this is presumably being done not for Amnesty, but I wonder partly to still counter the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. I wonder how much that is still looming in the background nearly 2 years later.
I have a feeling that that's right, and actually what's going on here is something close to your earlier suggestion that they almost hoped to be able to release this change in law without it getting too much attention or fanfare. It turns out it's had a little bit, but maybe during the coronavirus pandemic is the time to be getting this sort of news out, and it is going to probably be forgotten alongside countless other state decisions, because the main news is obviously what the main news is. So I sort of wonder whether they are doing a gradual background rectification. A lot of the moves that they've made haven't been of that kind. They've been trying to very publicly allow for women to drive and restrict the powers of the religious police and those sorts of moves. But I suspect that this is actually one where perhaps they've looked at something that is going to have more long-term consequences for them as they attempt to open up, and it just looks bad, and they realise that, and so it's an attempt to try to address that.
But Gabriel, how popular is this domestically? Because, some of the things that you can get executed for in Saudi Arabia would be populist things to be executed for here. Terrorism, for example, or rape or murder. And I suppose, that there are people living in Saudi Arabia who would say, well, yes, if someone murders someone and they happen to be 15 when they do it, why should they escape the death penalty that they'd get if they were 18 when they did it? I mean, is it actually that popular to dial down this policy there?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this law in particular, but I know that the majority of the public in Saudi Arabia does support the government in its more strict interpretations of Islamic law. That the problem is where we move into Islamic law, because Saudi Arabia's interpretation of the Quran and their Wahhabist fundamentalist ideology means that it's got a judicial system that is they kind of wing it a bit when it comes to punishing crimes that the rest of the world would see as pretty minor, particularly when it comes to, adultery and things like that, which obviously in this country, you'd be hard pressed to find enough support to reinstate the death penalty for murder. And that's like the one, crime that I feel like a lot of people could get behind the support for the death penalty of. But, they're beheading people for practically nothing, especially considering their judicial system has been described pretty much as a joke. Like they do trials under duress in like one day with like no juries, no nothing. It's a mess.
And Kari, they still have open to them flogging.
No, this ban on executing minors or people convicted of crimes when they're under the age of 18, it was actually announced 2 days after the Saudi government announced that they were effectively abolishing floggings. Previously, it had been mandatory as a form of punishment for offences including homosexuality, adultery, pestering girls, but it no longer is. It's now going to be replaced by prison time or fines. So perhaps, as Arion's saying, this is the Saudis' way of pushing through getting rid of legislation that would have been caused a lot of uproar among that international trading partners.
And where do you think their leader, MBS, stands now, Arion? We review this periodically on the show. It's one of our concerns, China, Russia, him. What do you think?
I just can't think how he could believe that his reform project is going well or is being received the way that he might have hoped that it would be all those years ago when he began it. It's one thing to allow female singers to sing in public, but when you are balancing that against the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the arrest of members of the Saudi royal family, the Qatar diplomatic crisis, it just seems like actually it's time to, I don't know, just start again or abandon the project of hoping to be regarded as a sort of a state that respects the sort of fundamental underpinnings of law and human rights that I think is the sort of the direction that Mohammed bin Salman was hoping to go. So I just think that it's almost time for him to quit or really actually double down and try to start being a responsible member of the international community.
I think as well, one thing that they probably didn't see coming is the fact that they've, in attempting to liberalize and modernize their society, especially in the eyes of the outside world, they've actually drawn attention to a lot more of the negative aspects of their society that the West might have been sleeping on in the past. And so I think the whole thing, as Arion said, has kind of backfired, and he needs to either double down or give it up.
Indeed. Well, one to watch. Gabriel, thank you for that. Kari, you are up next after this. So, Kari, you are finishing the show this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Why are couples zooming to tie the knot?
All that I have, I give to you.
All that I have, I give to you.
Even toilet roll and flour.
Even toilet roll and flour.
To have and to hold from this day forward.
Have and to hold until this day forward.
Until we can properly get married in October. And now, by the power invested in me, which is absolutely none at all, I pronounce you still not married.
The wedding of Poppy Welsh and Stephen Gilligan, as seen on the BBC News website. Kari, what was the story here?
Well, this couple, they're a Newcastle couple, and they were due to get married on the 18th of April, but obviously with the lockdown, that got scuppered. But they decided to go ahead anyway with a virtual wedding on Zoom. It's not legally binding, but it's a placeholder. But what's in the news this week is that New York State has just legalized video wedding ceremonies, so that under a new executive order, licenses can be issued remotely and ceremonies carried out using audio-video technology. So up until now, couples had to attend one of the state's 5 borough offices, but now can do it online. And obviously, this is an issue that's affecting couples all around the world. New York's been particularly badly hit in the US by the coronavirus pandemic, but couples around the world have been looking for ways to go ahead with weddings during lockdowns.
Now, I saw the video footage of Poppy and Stephen getting married, and it was hilarious. They had cardboard cutouts of all the guests. The bride had her father live streamed onto an iPad, which she held as she walked down the aisle. But it was all very much that British sense of humour of, this is a bit crap, isn't it? But isn't it a bit of fun? It's a laugh. But as you say, it wasn't a real wedding. And in fact, I think their marriage vows ended with her saying, I now pronounce you still not married, and everyone cheered. In New York State, they are legally officiated weddings, as you say, and it seems to me that those two things aren't the same thing. Like the joke of the British wedding isn't the same when the real wedding is happening on Zoom. I mean, isn't it a bit depressing, getting married, actually married on Zoom?
This has actually created a lot of debate in our household because my partner and I were planning on having a civil partnership, tying the knot in a civil partnership this year, now that heterosexuals can do that. And I know Gabe, in fact, is engaged to be married, aren't you? So it does raise a lot of issues. Personally, I don't think it's something I'd want to do. I'd rather wait. But then during this pandemic, a lot of couples, they need to get married, whether they have health issues, whether they need to get on their partner's health insurance. Frontline workers may very well want to get married. And it's also made people reassess their priorities so that perhaps people don't want their, the big fat wedding anymore. They're happy to do a stripped down version. So I think there's pros and cons for this growing trend.
Gabriel, have you considered this for your forthcoming nuptials?
Absolutely not. Like, I completely understand why some people would need to, but to me, it seems mad. Like, if you can afford to wait, then just wait. Like, I also feel like one thing that I have a big problem with is the fact that the part of a wedding is to share it with your family and for your family to also get something out of it. And if I were a family member and somebody were like, oh yeah, join us on your Zoom for our Zoom wedding, next week. And I'm like wearing half a tuxedo from the waist up and I'm still wearing pajamas at the bottom and not really drinking, not being able to party. And then suddenly when the wedding's over, I hit end call and I'm just sat in a silent room. Like, that's no fun. Who's going to, people are going to be like, oh, remember that thing that we did, with the Zoom wedding? And everyone's going to be like, that was all right.
I think those are valid points, but it also means that people who couldn't have attended can be there. People on other sides of the world, like Arion, or, people who are ill can attend. So in that sense, it does make it more accessible. You can have more of your friends and family with you at some level.
Arion.
And I wonder whether there's something potentially liberating as well about providing the opportunity for people to dial in remotely. As Kari says, I'm from Australia, my partner's from the UK, and for our wedding, you were kind of just there or you weren't. We got married in London, and if you couldn't make it, then you couldn't make it. But I think if this breaks down the barrier of people thinking that attendance is physical or nothing, then you could have, 50% of your guests in the room with you and the others just dialing in from wherever they are.
And it also takes off that pressure to spend ridiculous amounts of money on weddings. I mean, there was a study that found last year that found the average UK wedding costs almost £32,000. And it's also expensive for guests. The average guest spent almost $400. Pre-pandemic, the wedding industry was just growing and growing, even though actual global marriage rates were declining just because people are spending such crazy amounts of money on weddings. Maybe this is the end of the age of the ultra expensive destination wedding. And personally, I think that's probably a good thing.
Well, it's definitely a good thing as a guest, isn't it? If I tot up all the money that I spend on gifts and stag do's and everything else, it would be quite nice if the actual ceremony was on Zoom, so I didn't have to go to that. But for the wedding industry, as you say, this could be a real problem. This could be a problem for all kinds of associated industries, couldn't it, Gabriel? From, cake makers to DJs to photographers.
Absolutely, it could be. I mean, it is true what Kari says, that I mean, she mentioned that I'm currently engaged, and I've been looking into research because I was also going to get married this year, and it's extraordinarily expensive. Like, even to do it, we even thought about, eloping and doing it abroad, just us two. And even that, the paperwork and all that sort of stuff was so expensive. So obviously, yeah, a lot of people will be out of pocket. But it's one of those, I don't know if, like, where we draw a line and say that's just a casualty of the coronavirus pandemic. It's another one of millions and billions that are happening across the world.
And I wonder too whether actually there's opportunities there potentially that you could have, roving live video crews at the wedding who are trying to both bring the experience of the wedding to people who are zooming their way into the event, and also trying to insert the people who are remote, like a session of PMQs with half of the MPs not in the room, to try to superimpose them on the wedding in that direction as well. So who knows? Maybe there's opportunities to make money this way as well.
Just bringing it back to what's happening at the moment. We all need something to cheer us up. I read about one woman in New Zealand who'd done a symbolic but not a legal Zoom wedding. And she described it as grabbing life and having a moment of hope and good cheer. And I think, regardless of the long-term implications, we could all do with a moment of hope and good cheer right now.
Gabriel.
I think a side point is that I do absolutely think that the UK needs to liberalise and particularly England needs to liberalise its wedding laws. I think they're way, way too strict. Whereas in America, you can kind of get married anywhere as long as you have the right kind of documents in order. But the problem that I have is that there was a really interesting piece by Kate Murphy in the New York Times this week in which she noticed that neuroscientists say that the like distortions and delays inherent in video communication can end up making people feel quite awkward and isolated, and that would, and like the blocking and the freezing and the buffering and people cutting in and out would make it kind of awkward and difficult to enjoy. I think that would add another element of stress, especially considering that Zoom removes the ability for people to pick up on very, very minor and subtle social cues that you'll get from facial expressions and speech patterns and things like that. So I feel like the whole thing, unless you're just going to sit there and watch and not take part, it's going to be difficult.
And what about fraud as well? Because we talked about this a few weeks ago with the boom in online auctions. What if you are not who you say you are? I mean, what precautions are the officiants taking, Kari, in New York State to make sure that the people who are being portrayed on a webcam are the people who are marrying each other?
They have actually set quite tough conditions. You've got to provide valid ID during the conference call or conference wedding. It must be performed live, and the couple have to be within New York State, and then they have to immediately send signed documents to the town or city clerk and the witnesses and the officiant. So it's all, it is very strictly mandated. And actually similar systems have been set up in the United Arab Emirates, for example. They've instituted online Muslim marriages with licenses can be obtained from the Ministry of Justice website. Morocco have also introduced online wedding license application systems. Different countries are doing this and they're making it work. So the UK could do this if they wanted to follow suit. I think a key point of this is really why you're getting married. Is the focus on the big wedding, or is it just that you want to make that commitment and this offers a way to do that right now?
I guess the thing is, though, whatever mechanic you use, I mean, I smiled when I watched that video that you sent through, Kari. Weddings do make people feel good. And at the moment, people just want a bit of romance on any platform, don't they?
Clearly, US TV show Today, they've picked up on this. Last week, the host officiated a surprise virtual wedding on Zoom, as in it was a surprise for the couple because the family and friends had organised it. It was an Arizona couple and their pastor was there, so it was all legal. So, it's become a show, it's become entertainment. So maybe that's the next step.
Well, we'd hate to bring anyone entertainment on this show, so let's wrap up before it proceeds any further. Thank you to Arion, Kari and Gabriel. I now pronounce this edition of The Week Unwrapped done and dusted, not consummated, thankfully. Our entire back catalogue is available for you in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, as well as through the good times and the bad. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. The hymn is on page 59. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sarah Miles at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.